Hey y'all, happy day. Today we're going to be presenting on phenomenological and grounded theory. These are two qualitative research methods. My name is Adam Maxwell, and presenting with me is,
Melissa Ackley.
And Amber Denton.
and we're just going to go ahead and get right on into it. So here's a quick outline of what lies ahead. We have the same structure for both theories here. We're going to be starting out with phenomenological and then moving on to grounded. We're just going to cover the origins of the theories, the definitions, and then we're going to go into the research structure and the typical outcomes, critiques, and considerations. So first is phenomenological research. So we tend to subscribe the origins of this theory to Edmund Husserl. Husserl. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. But he was the pioneer who was really asking the question, what is an experience like? Trying to understand human experience through questioning. And he regarded phenomenologically as involving, the comprehension of meaning, the life world, or the particular phenomena that a human is experiencing by returning to the essence of pre-reflective understandings. It's like a lot of words, very flowery. But generally, he was concerned with like direct experiences that people have, and really just like trying to understand them mutually. If we want to go on to the next slide. So this is some more of the origins. Let's a little bit more about Edmund. He rejected that objects exist in the external world independently of like human perception and consciousness, which is kind of out there for some people, but that's where he was at. And so, he was very concerned with subjective experience and how people experience certain things inside their own consciousness. And so he kind of, he reduced the external world to personal consciousness, which is why phenomena, which he regarded as like pure realities, were so important to him. And thus, the birth of phenomenology, the science of pure phenomena, according to Edmund, quote unquote pure. If we want to go on ahead to definition slide. So what does that really look like today? Well, phenomenological research is when we study the essence of what something is quote unquote really like. And that really has to do with the meaning and nature of one's experience, one's personal subjective experience. So phenomenological research is interested in how people perceive and what meanings they perceive. Really how their like experiences are structured and felt and understood from their subjective position, which is, very qualitative information. So, that can get into some gray areas, which we'll get into a little bit with the critiques. But yeah, it's really about, the particular perspective, relationship, and like construct, which somebody like holds within themselves and trying to understand that, I guess in quantifiable terms, although it's not necessarily quantifiable as it is purely phenomenological. If we want to go on to the next one, there's a little bit more definition going on. Just like some fun history here. The word phenomenology comes from the Greek word, which I probably will not pronounce correctly, phanestai. I'm not quite sure. But it means to appear or make visible. And this research method, which we'll get into more, it really goes into, bracketing subjective experiences and like, I guess you'd call it data or shared experiences, verbalized experiences, in order to kind of categorize and understand what phenomena are like for individuals on kind of a quantifiable quasi-scientific level. And the task of the researcher is to describe things in themselves and to permit what is before one to enter into consciousness and to be understood in its meaning and essences. So really, I think that's just like what they're saying there is like bringing to awareness one's subjective phenomenological experience and then coming to understand it in an intellectual way. And I think that is all for me as of right now. I'm going to pass it off to Melissa.
Thanks, Adam. Melissa here. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit here about the phenomenological research structure. And it kind of begins with experiential expressions. So here we're looking at the personal feelings, beliefs, and attitudes of the individual who is a participant in this qualitative research. And when doing so, a pattern of meaning will develop and be revealed. And then those patterns of meaning that are developed are clustered and present a scheme, an image of the individual, as well as the universality of the phenomenon. So how it transcends into the world at large and is unique to each person as well. And then those expressions move into, they become amplified. So those themes are amplified and the meanings are intensified so that they're really able to be seen as just that particular phenomena, like the lens is focused in on it and it is the big picture. And then it's important to stay true to spontaneity of the expression and the tonal qualities and the subjective and the objective experience of the individual who is participating in the research. And then the thematic amplification also integrates personal meaning and the structure of the phenomenon so that it can be integrated in reflective synthesis, the kind of like the last part of the research structure. So the themes are integrated and the personal meaning and the phenomenon structure is refined and made meaningful. And then it addresses generalized culture and socially applicable variables. And the next slide. So this slide was added just because there are some key concepts that are worth mentioning. As Adam mentioned earlier with bracketing, that's a really key concept here with the phenomenological research process. And the bracketing itself is more of the event, like the doing part. And then this word epoché is it means a suspension of judgment, and it's like it's a habit of thinking. So it's where the researcher approaches the research process with taking their own experiences and beliefs and putting them aside, and this helps with validity. And then some phenomenological researchers argue that one cannot truly fully bracket because per the nature of phenomenology, how can we ever really get rid of our subjective experience? So that's kind of a debate. And one way to help demonstrate the validity of bracketing and this notion of epoché is to keep a reflexive diary of thoughts and feelings and perceptions of oneself that can help one as a researcher re-examine our positions and avoid bias as much as possible, considering that we're moving through a subjective lens all the time. So, and then intentionality. So intentionality really intensifies the meaning of things in the research here. And again, staying true to spontaneity of expression and tonal qualities and the subjective objective experience is part of that intentionality as well. And then integrating the personal meaning and the structure of the phenomenon here is, again, intentional. So those things were included on the other slide, but the point of it is that intentionality is very important here. And it is qualitative research with all of the themes integrated, holding the personal meaning and addressing the generalized cultural and socially accepted variables, which is all part of this qualitative rather than quantitative research. The next slide. And now on to Amber.
Thanks, Melissa. This is Amber here. I'm going to discuss a little bit about the outcomes of phenomenological research. This type of research typically results in themes that are extracted from the analysis of the participants' interviews. And some examples of these themes that I pulled from a research study that I found on self-stigma around mental health for patients are patient self-stigma feelings, exploring the origins of self-stigma and changing thoughts about self-stigma. And then also I'll discuss a little bit about the critiques of the phenomenological research. So the first one is phenomenology fails to recognize the concept of true emptiness and focuses on co-created themes. So therefore it's unable to free itself from the limitations of abstraction and does not capture the experience of non-dual awareness. And then the second one is most of this research is completed most of the research completed for this approach focuses on one participant when collecting data. So therefore that threatens the validity of the information because we're only pulling from a single individual's set of data. And therefore it's really hard to generalize that to the whole population. And then on to Adam.
All right, let's go ahead and get into grounded theory. Go ahead and move on to the origins. So the origins for the grounded theory trace back to, oh gosh, pronunciation once again, Anselm Strauss and Barney Glasser. I feel like that was pretty good. So both of these researchers pioneered the grounded theory, which is a step-by-step method which uses inductive and deductive reasoning to develop a process, action, or interaction generated from the data. So blah, blah, blah. Essentially, this method is intent on like collecting data and then forming theories and processes and conclusions directly from the data, really trying to stay as true to the data as possible without putting too much like personal bias or assumption into it, which, that's really the goal of most research, right? But with grounded, it's very much data oriented with the idea of staying quote unquote as true as possible. If we want to go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to go on to the definition now. It kind of originated from sociology. It's based on the idea of discovering a theory by scrutinizing concepts that are grounded in the data. So basically identifying how basic social processes occur in particular situations, and that, identifying how those processes would occur would come directly from the data. And this is, this is kind of restricting in a way, because if you have like a hypothesis or something in yourself, but the data doesn't reflect it at all, it's not really encouraged to go into your hypothesis. It's more encouraged to look at the data and, figure out exactly what it's saying. And grounded theory is oftentimes very intimately related with the theory that like you're kind of starting and stemming from. And this gets into like some popular variants of grounded theory, such as classical, modified, constructivist, feminist, postmodern, discursive, and there's so many more. But essentially, this is a theory that is an umbrella, and underneath that umbrella are many other theories which relatively hold the same structure, which is, really kind of worshiping the data. But they all are nuanced in the way that, meaning is made from that data, how that data is collected, what data is important. The list goes on and is particular to each and every variation. So we're just going to go ahead and move on. So this is basically kind of like a love child of quantitative and qualitative approaches. Essentially, the goal for grounded theory is to systematically seek out evidence to verify and like the theory and ground the data, grounded in the data. That's where grounded comes from. So once again, as I've been saying, the theory is directly derived from data. And so really the research methods are all about generating data and collecting data. And then, the assessment process at the end is where the theory and the interpretation happens. It's kind of trying to separate those two processes in a way, while also keeping them, totally intimate, but not simultaneous, I guess is the right way of saying that. So, and another thing that is important to mention is that grounded theory is trying to reduce data and like simplify in a way. A lot of research, it seems, especially with qualitative research, it can get really out of hand. You can end up with a lot of data that is kind of hard to categorize and make sense out of. And so grounded theory focuses on gathering data into specific themes or essences, which can then be fed into the later analysis process wherein descriptions, models, or theories are developed. So it's kind of like, if you know the theory of Occam's razor, like the simplest answer is the best answer. It's like trying to just like refine and get down to the basics. That way there's as little room for, bias and assumption and prior beliefs and so forth to really get in the way of understanding how to acquire data and what data means. And I think with that, we are passing the baton to Melissa once again.
Thanks again, Adam. Okay, so a little bit on the grounded research structure, and sorry if my little guided by social constructivist research paradigm is a little off center there. And I believe Amber will be talking more about that here in a minute. But yeah, so one thing about the grounded research structure is the theory construction versus the population. So rather than representing a population, we're looking at aiming to generate a theory. And so this helps where there is limited existing theory. We can kind of move in new directions by doing research in this way. And then because it's not governed by a predetermined sample size, so that's pretty open-ended. And like Adam was mentioning, the data analysis process is the important part, starting with all of the bulk data and reducing it down through an iterative, inductive, and deductive and reductive process of organizing it. And this idea of reflexivity is pretty important. Again, that goes back to the reflexive diaries can be important to keep here. And that idea of reflexivity is like the key thinking activity that helps us identify potential influences throughout the research process. It involves like realizing and giving an honest examination of the values and interests of the researcher that might impinge upon your research work. And it helps qualitative researchers to identify areas of potential bias and just, minimize their influence by bracketing them, which was also in the phenomenological research. The theoretical sampling, just this helps determine where to sample next, based on what has been reduced, where do we sample next based on the theory that's emerging, rather than based on the theory we have, who are we going to sample? It's kind of a reverse method. And individuals contribute to building the opening and axial coding of the theory. Coding is really predominant in this grounded research and coding books and so forth. The data collection, so a lot of interviews reveal rich descriptions of participants' views, feelings, intentions, and actions. And these interviews, the data from them is gathered in multiple stages, and it's coded and categorized. And like I was saying before, the iterative, inductive, and deductive, which isn't on there, but that too, and reductive process. So, and dyads develop groups of two, develop factors, subfactors, and definitions. And through individual voices and intersectional experiences of participants, there are themes, essences, and theories that emerge. And it's just this idea, like Adam was mentioning before, it is grounded in the data. And the way I was kind of visualizing this is like in the distillation process of say you have a plant material and you have all this information from the plant, and it is in the distillation process, and it gets reduced down, and what you end up having left is the essence or the essential oil of the thing. And that is where that would be the theory that has emerged from the distillation process of the data. Moving right along, on to Amber.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm going to discuss a little bit about the outcomes of grounded theory. This theory typically results in the development of codes and categories. And then those codes and categories are then compiled into what is called a code book and distributed to the research team members for review and analysis. And then a few critiques of grounded theory, like Melissa mentioned earlier, when sampling in this approach, it doesn't really focus on the representation of the population, but instead more on the building of the actual theory or the knowledge around what is being researched. And then the second critique is that some researchers see this type of or this approach as encumbering because of all the rules and things that are laid out within it. And then finally, sometimes this approach is only used for a coding technique and is not used to its full potential because they're not using it to create a theory or knowledge. They're simply using it for the coding technique. And then here is a slide with all of our references.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thank you very much.
Thank y'all
Thanks,
so
y'all.
much. Bye.
Woo!